our vision, especially when we discuss about being against war, it was the best for me. I think as mothers, if we unite, if we say this is what we want peace, we don't want war, we shall achieve it. In African context, whatever is going through is because of the support of the women. Because we are the one in agriculture, we are the one digging. So if we said, no, we are not giving you our food for you, where will you get the food to be in the bush, to come and disturb us, to come and fight us? So the only challenge we have is to tell our women our rights, for us to stand up, to tell the world that we don't need any war more. We want peace, we want to settle down, we want everything that will see the world go positively. We are tired of negative, we are tired of bombs, we are tired of raping women, we are tired of defilement, we are tired of all the nasty on this world. Therefore, we need peace. And I think that is what Motherhood Movement will do. Thank you.
32 photographs is actually the 16 jobs that the U.S. media likes to highlight around Mother's Day every year as the 16 core jobs that mothers do, that in fact they don't get much they get no remuneration for, really, and they certainly not much recognition. It's sort of an expected journey of mothers, and these tasks are expected and taken for granted as well.
I'm from an island called Trinidad in the West Indies, and the way I was brought up, it was just the village, you know, the village mentality, where the village raised the children. When everybody was accountable, you know, everybody took charge of everybody's child, and that village concept was still there. But now the village is just broken up. So I think that's where a lot of these children are so broken up.
Linda Lisi Jurgens, National Association of Mother Centers.
Juliana Forbes from Mothers Acting Up.
Beth Osnes, also with Mothers Acting Up.
Amy Anderson from mamazine.com.
Amy Richards from feminist.com and Third Way Foundation.
Mary Olivea from momsrising.org.
Gertrude Feste, Feminist Forum, South Africa.
Pat Gowans, Welfare Warriors and Mother Warriors Voice, Milwaukee.
Andrea O'Reilly, the Association for Research on Mothering, and Demeter Press.
Lori Slepian, the National Association of Mother Centers.
Monica Jekyll, Mother Centers International Network for Empowerment, MINE.
Gudrun Frank-Wissmann, Matriarchal Values.
Genevieve Vaughn, International Feminists for a Gift Economy.
Heide Göttner-Abendroth, International Academy Hagia for Matriarchal Studies and Matriarchal Spirituality.
Joy Rose, Mamapalooza, Motherhood Foundation, and the Museum of Motherhood.
Penny Irons, Aboriginal Mother Center, Vancouver, BC, also a member of Mother Centers International Network for Empowerment, MINE.
My name is Wahu Kara. I am a Kikuyu Kenyan African woman from Kenya, and I am a mother of 4 and a grandmother of 4. And besides that, as a person, I hold very strongly about the values of motherhood. And for me, motherhood is not just the biological essence of giving birth. It is the totality of life.
Now is the time to reach out to mothers, especially those who have not been politically engaged before. We need to support mothers to collectively raise our voices to say that we're not struggling because of an epidemic of personal failings, but rather due to a societal problem in the way our countries treat mothers and families.
Matriarchies are not just a reversal of patriarchy with women ruling over men as the usual misinterpretation would have it. Matriarchies are instead mother-centered societies. They are based on the value of motherliness, which holds for everybody, for mothers and those who are not mothers, for women and men alike.
Now to start with a quotation from a very wonderful African woman whom some of you may have heard of or know, Ama Atu Edu, a feminist from Ghana. She says, "The image of the African woman in the mind of the world has been set. She's breeding too many children she cannot take care of, and for whom she should not expect other people to pick up the tab. She's hungry, and so are her children. In fact, it has become a cliche of Western photojournalism that the African woman is old beyond her years."
I am an advocate for mothers in the developing world. And I've been 20 years involved in this issue, and I have to apologize that it's only been in the last 3 to 5 that I began to realize how critical this issue was.
I've been to conferences from Nicaragua to Nigeria, from Cuba to China, on the woman's ticket, and it allows me to self-reflect. What am I doing to change the lives of ordinary women?
Seeing the homepage of the Association for Research on Mothering struck me like a flash of lightning. What already has been done and what is possible to do.
My mother, I was born in 1973, and my mother, I think, was very, considered herself a feminist, and so tried to, was in that wave of mothers trying to figure out, how do we raise these daughters, and so talked to me a lot about feminist ideas, and so I think I kind of grew up with that, just playing through my head and seeing how it, looked in the world. And then when I went to college, I became involved with a group of other Chicana women that were organizing around women's issues. And when I left college, I began work with the National Latina Health Organizations, which is, I would say, one of the first generation of women of color organizations that begins organizing apart from the mainstream women's movement. And then the National Latina Health Organization becomes one of the co-founders of Sister Song, along with 15 other organizations.
In the last 50 years, there have been so many more opportunities for women to connect. I even think about when I first became a mother 18 years ago, we didn't have the internet, and I had a small community of mothers in my neighborhood, but I longed for Mothering Magazine to come into my mailbox every month because that gave me a sense of a wider connection to a community of mothers. And now women can get online and connect with one another, share support, share information.
I think the motherhood movement is an incredible movement forward, but I think the caution that I have about it, the concern I have about it, is the idea that we're harnessing this power because we're intrinsically more moral as a result of being mothers, that we have some kind of mandate that allows us to change the world because we're mothers. What I like about the mommy blogging world is that it's very individualistic, that it represents a diversity of opinion instead of any kind of monolith of opinion. I think from a feminist perspective, many women who would not necessarily consider themselves feminist are presenting a version of motherhood that's much more consistent with feminist motherhood studies of the last 30 years, but that hasn't been publicly seen. So people are saying things about the ways that being a mother is a thankless job, about the ways that living in a toxic world with systemic aspects of discrimination makes living in that world as a parent incredibly difficult. People are saying those things whether they self-identify or as feminist or not.
Motherhood has changed dramatically over the last 50 years. In fact, probably more so than any time, in our human history. The work that I do, I really believe that the way we mother, the way we understand mothering, the way we view mothering, is really develops and responds to changes in our society and in our economy. So after the war, women we know had to be pushed back into the home. So there was a celebration of domesticity, and it was women's innate calling, and that's where women belong. And so in the 60s, we know what happened. There was an outcry against that, a reaction against that. So women went into the workforce and sort of left that cult of domesticity behind. And when we're going to make it a man's world, and motherhood was devalued. The standards of good motherhood changed in the 90s, and the ante was up like we've never seen in history. To be a good mom now, you probably need a staff of 10. Of course, you don't have a staff of 10. We have this view to be, motherhood's supposed to be your all identity. It's supposed to be who you are. You're supposed to be with your kids 24/7. Your kids need all this excessive time and money and energy and love, and they don't have it. They're going to rob a bank when they're 12. And the standards have become so impossible that I think there is a bit, and women are stepping back now and going, wait a minute, this is crazy making.
Nothing in the mid-70s did. Your motherhood life and your public life, your life outside of your home were very separate. Even stores did not welcome you with a carriage. The library would not let you come in with a carriage.
I think mothers are fed up with these impossible standards of motherhood. They're fed up that they're not even supported in the important work they do. And I think we've reached that crisis point in our culture where we've inflated the standards that no one can live up to. They're not good for moms. They're not good for our kids. Precisely at the same time, we're taking support away from moms.
The last 50 years have seen such enormous change in breastfeeding. Breastfeeding almost disappeared from the mothering repertoire in the 1950s. Breastfeeding rates were at a historic low in the 1950s. But interestingly, if you look at the documentary record, the photographic record, it's very common to see scenes of mothers nursing their babies. Those who did nurse could nurse anywhere. Now, in the 21st century, breastfeeding rates are much higher than they used to be. They're on the rise, but mothers come under fire when they dare to nurse in public.
I think what's the same in the feminist movement is that a lot of the fights of the second wave haven't been won, like equal pay for equal work, reproductive rights. But I think what's changed, and I know we've been talking at this conference about why the mothers movement now, is I think there's a kind of critical mass of women who are my age, I'm in my late 30s, who were told that success is having a career, success is having an education, but no one mentioned that having those two things, those kind of individual achievements, would be complicated by having children, made harder. Also, our priorities might shift through having children. That was never discussed with me at any point during my, I have a bachelor's degree, I have a master's degree, I have a second master's degree, and a PhD. That wasn't ever really discussed in my education.
What has changed in the last 50 years is we no longer believe or buy the idea that you can't be an artist and be a mother at the same time. That's a myth. And that's a myth that people have perpetuated on two fronts. One, from patriarchy, saying essentially we're going to only value Emily Dickinson from the 19th century because she had no children and she was crazy. We're only going to teach you about Sylvia Plath because she committed suicide because she couldn't balance the two. So we have that on one hand, and we also have, unfortunately, in the recovery of women writers by the feminist movement, we had, because there was a reaction against the patriarchal definition of motherhood, a lot of the texts that were recovered and celebrated, again, Sylvia Plath, people who didn't, mother writers who didn't make it, when there's tons of mother writers who did.
The distinction of first, second, and third wave is misleading. It suggests that feminist movement began in the first wave, which was in the mid-1800s, which denigrates what was happening with Native American women who have lived very women-empowered cultures long before white people ever settled, and white middle-class women, upper-class women came up with the idea of organized feminism. So in Native cultures, there was women-empowered living that was going on long before first wave. So first wave feminism focused on issues of policy, on obviously the vote. We usually think of first wave in terms of mid-1800s to about 1920 when we got the vote. Focused on the right to earn money, the right to hold on to the money that you earn, the right to divorce, the right to custody after divorce. These were some of the primary issues that women in the first wave were fighting for. Women of color in the first wave were fighting to be seen at all.
One thing that makes me hopeful is the role of fathers, how far it's come in the past 50 years. My grandfather, I can't imagine him changing a diaper or being in charge of packing lunches. And I see my own husband as an equal parenting partner. I mean, there are certain things he does with Caleb, my son, and there are certain things I do. So I think what has happened is that women have made so many great strides in the workplace, and men have made maybe quieter and slower strides in the home. So I think, you know, it would be great for my son when he is older, both he and whoever his partner is, they both have to make the same sorts of choices.
I was 17 when I got pregnant, and my son's father was 6 years older than me. And we came from very different backgrounds, and ultimately it wasn't a good match. And when we separated, I decided to continue my education at a university, and the expectation was that my son would join me and I would have custody. In a temporary arrangement, he stayed with his father, and that sort of evolved into the more permanent arrangement that we have now, where his father has physical custody, because it turned out to be a better situation for him. His father has a traditional Mexican family. He's taken care of by his grandparents, his uncles, his aunts, his cousins. The hardest part about being a non-custodial parent for me is trying to stay involved in his life because I care. And it's gotten a little bit easier as he's gotten older and he has a cell phone and we talk all the time. I loved being a mom from the moment my son was born. And, you know, I had other friends who were moms. When he was very little, I had other friends who were moms. And then when I separated from my husband and went to school, one of the major things that I lost was a sense of community with other moms.
The Good Girl Life Plan is sort of implicitly understood sort of in our culture as a trajectory that good girls will follow. And so that would mean getting your education, going through a courtship, an engagement, and a marriage, and then having children and going on to grandparenting, whatever that would be. Missteps occur when a girl doesn't follow that procedure or the process step by step. So, for instance, if I'm a young woman who gets pregnant before I've had finished my education, I've fallen off the Good Girl Life Plan. If I have a child without being in a heterosexual marriage, I'm no longer on the Good Girl Life Plan. The Good Girl Life Plan is arrogant, to say the least. Choice, the idea that women have choices, free choice, is not always true. That there are lots of factors, forces that limit our choices.
I definitely think that being a feminist and being an outspoken feminist, automatically people assumed I wouldn't be a good mother because I think they see feminists as being a little bit more self-serving. And so it was not shocking to me that friends would then say to me, why don't you include your children, and see that as a consequence, not of my personality, but as a consequence of my feminism. In the same way that I'm not married to my boyfriend and he's the father of my children, and everybody thinks it's a radical feminist statement that I'm trying to make, but it's really that he doesn't want to get married, and I really don't know what marriage means. But it's sort of a funny thing that once you have feminism in your identity, you're already perceived to be anti whatever is the mainstream accepted role for women.
So I have completed my master's in women's studies, and I have been an activist in the disability community the entire time I was a student. I've sat on a number of boards, including the Council of Canadians with Disabilities, the National Educational Association of Disabled Students. I'm a single mom, and I have been the entire time I did both my degrees. My biological family has a genetic disorder that goes from generation to generation. I don't actually have the same disorder, but my grandmother had several of her children taken away and put into institutions, because at that time it wasn't believed that because she had the same disorder that she could parent. And it was believed that the best thing for those children was to go into an institution. Very bad things happened to those children in those institutions. And then those children came out and had kids. I'm one of those kids, and things didn't go very well. And I think not supporting the mom to parent, disrupting the family in that way, has led to some really awful things that could have been prevented. There are many issues about being a disabled mom that, particularly in Canada, our government doesn't have a lot of resources for single moms as it is. And if you're a single mom like myself with disabilities or other disabilities, to gain access to resources is very difficult, and often the government would rather put children into foster care than to pay for the supports that a disabled mom would require to parent with ease for the most part, or independently at least.
Most women who are incarcerated are mothers. Once they're imprisoned, maintaining a relationship with their children is made extremely difficult due to limited visiting hours, the outrageous cost of collect phone calls, and the distance from home, as many women's prisons are located in remote rural areas. And even once a woman is released from prison, a felony conviction makes it nearly impossible to receive public assistance or get public housing or food stamps, which are precisely the things needed by low-income women to care for their children.
The responsibilities of motherhood have been heavily devalued, particularly in a lot of so-called civilized societies. One of the issues that's really dear to my heart is the way in which poor women and really, really marginalized women in many parts of the world hardly ever get considered as thinkers. And so a lot of the ideas that we have about what does women's empowerment mean have been developed without the input of women who in fact act in very empowered ways on a day-to-day basis. But we have not benefited from that knowledge in any significant way. And so one of the things that I hope to do is to use the resources available in academia to start to look at life histories and oral history and start to pay more attention to the historical trajectory of how really marginalized women have been able to do some pretty incredible things, and what kinds of lessons that thinking and those actions can actually have for current feminist projects. Because I think the reason why we keep on seeing the re-marginalization of poor women, even within contemporary feminist projects, is in fact because we are replaying a historic marginalization of poor people as people who don't actually produce knowledge. We keep on thinking that those are not the contexts, those are not the places we go to learn something really theoretically valuable.
Rates of drug use are the same among races and classes. So why are the women that are being targeted usually low-income women and women of color? Well, now we're talking about our perceptions of what a good mother is and who we want to become mothers. We don't want some, like the perception of a woman pushing a stroller, in the projects is quite different from a woman pushing a stroller in the suburb. And both those moms could use cocaine. But one we're going to prosecute and the other one we're going to talk to in the doctor's office, refer to treatment, but never get the criminal justice system involved.
A recent study showed that mothers in the United States are 79% less likely to be hired than non-mothers.
I believe that a feminist mother is somebody who is not only aware of their own possibilities and making sure that they have choices, but aware of how many people might not be able to make those same choices or not want to make those same choices. I think a feminist lifestyle is an examined lifestyle. I think that we're never going to make pure choices. We don't live in a pure society. And so any choice is ultimately going to seem compromised because we're striving for ideals. And it's so rarely do we get there. And so I think the most we can ask of feminist mothers is that they go on that process of questioning and that they make sure that other people can.
Important thing to keep in mind with regard to third wave feminism is it's always standing on the foundation that was built by second wave. So it's always a continuation of that effort. And standing up on that foundation, then, third wave feminists are positioned to be able to take feminism into exciting, riskier directions. So, for example, one of the things that third wave feminists are able to focus on more is mothering, and the ways in which feminism and mothering are interwoven for them and are not experienced as separate or in conflict in negative ways with each other.
I think, you know, feminism, everything feminism has done has had a lasting impact. It's incremental, and sometimes we take a couple steps back, depending on what decade we're living in. But the gains that feminism made, we are living them. Maybe not as much as we want to be living them, but we are living with the gains of feminism. I mean, you know, when women are in school, women vote, I mean, all those things we take for granted now. I think the same is going to happen with motherhood. Yes, of course, we might lose some of those gains. Maybe, you know, 30 years from now, we'll look back and say, oh, we really wanted this, but we didn't get it all. But no, I think when change happens, change stays.
I do consider myself a feminist, although I don't necessarily think you have to be a feminist to enjoy Brainchild. Just because so many people define it so many different ways, we just define it in the way that women and mothers should be treated as people.
I am one with the universal mama. I am one with the universal girl. If you want to know my individuality, you must look into the eyes of every woman that you see.
I really like the term empowered mothering that's come out from here that we haven't been using in the Mother Center movement in that way. I mean, we know that it's about empowering women, but we haven't used the term like that, and I really like that because that's actually what is happening, that women are defining themselves, how they want to raise their children, how they want to be a mother, and of course there's also a huge different range of the way women are doing that, and it's all possible in the Mother Center.
Over the last 50 years to mothering, wonderful things have happened. I mean, the sort of feminist consciousness, the notion that you know, women can be and do anything that they want to do, and the notion of choice, the notion that we are able to make these choices. But I think also what we've learned is that we're up against a culture that inhibits us from making those choices. And I think the consciousness that we now have is that we're simply going to have to change the culture in order to permit us to be able to fully realize our potential as mothers and our children to realize their potential as human beings.
That was the purpose. That's what was the major role in my life, bringing up 4 sons who were not diminishing of womanhood or motherhood. I felt was a major accomplishment, making a network of mother centers and still continuing the hope of transforming the world and bringing humanity up to a higher level of development.
You Move, United Mothers Opposing Violence Everywhere, first of all, it's not gender specific, it's gender inclusive. And it comprises of a number of mothers who have each lost a child to violence, along with supporting members of the community. So we try to go into schools, we have forums, we have rallies, and we're trying to get the Prime Minister to put an overall ban on handguns, because we believe that these are the mass weapons of destruction of our kids.
I have 2 children. I have a son, Emmett, and a daughter, Eliza. And Emmett is a very private person. He doesn't speak a lot. And the other day at school, his teacher said, it was a really interesting day today. We're talking about all these world issues, and Emmett keeps like raising his hand and like saying all these things. It's very uncharacteristic. And one of the kids said, Emmett, how come you know all this stuff? And Emmett says, because I'm an activist. And I thought, oh.
It's been an absolute, total frustrating situation to remind women, as a Canadian group said, is mothers are women, to remind the feminist movement, mothers are women. We should be part of that movement. We're the majority of women. We became so frustrated, we finally decided we're not feminists, we're motherists. You know?
We declared May as Mother's Month, and we said, let's every May create the biggest shebang we can with as many people as we can find and really put mom performance, mom voices on the map. And so what started as a single stage in Manhattan in 2002 became over 50 city event taking place in Canada, the United States, Australia, England, and multiple grassroots performances, whether they were in a farm in Ohio with some local mom bands, or whether it was a large-scale parks event in New York City on the pier, where maybe a few thousand families would come. And at this event, if you can imagine, there would be a stage, and on that stage would be placenta, housewives on Prozac, the My Dolls, Mother Lode Trio, the mothers, and Moms Acting Up would have a booth or a table. And so would the Westchester Office for Women, and so would the United Way, and so would the Mother's Health Enterprise, and so would Literary Mama, and I continue to extend invitations to everyone because really it is about the collective voice. So if you can imagine an event, rather than being organized by respectfully a group of guys who invite women to attend, instead we're putting women in charge of the event. So women organize the event, women perform at the event, we feature mom-made objects and merchandise, and we feature women's organizations. So it's a collective where culture, art, education, and commerce all meet. That's why it's a palooza.
I think I'm on the crest of a wave. I'm not, 50 years is before, like 20 years of that was before I was born. And so I'm seeing a change. I'm seeing people focusing, I'm seeing mothers being mobilized. For the first time, I got invited to a conference from the National Association of Mother Centers, and I'm in the reproductive justice movement and the feminist movement, and I've never been invited before. And so how do I phrase this? I really think that they're getting mobilized, and they're talking about the things that we want to talk about. Because pregnancy is it's a 9 months, and it's a life-transforming moment, and avoiding pregnancy is what we do for the first 19 years of our lives. But when you're a mother for life. And galvanizing that political power and saying what we want is universal health care, affordable child care, value to people who stay at home and provide care. I mean, that's huge. Because if you can have that, well, then that's a feminist issue. Then I can have my job and become a partner at a law firm because I'll have affordable child care. Or then we focus on health as opposed to punishment when we're talking about people with addictions and other diseases. I think that when mothers speak in this movement galvanizes those around them, like they have the potential to really have wide-ranging social change. In a way, the mothers can talk to what each of us in our discrete professions and our discrete fields talk about in a unified way.
I'm an activist mother, and what that means to me is trying to reach out to every child, trying to see what I could do to make a difference for every mother's son, every mother's daughter. It doesn't have to be my natural born child or my biological child, but I have a passion in my heart. My heart reaches out to every kid out there. And, and there's a burning passion in my heart to do whatever I can so that these kids will succeed and their mothers don't have to go through the pain I'm going through.
I think the core thing is for everybody to learn to be nurturing. It's not all about girls carrying the feminist flag. It's not about that. It's about everyone understanding the core of being a human being and nurturing and caregiving. It's urgent that women raise their boys that they raise their boys to be feminists, if you will.
I believe the human being is maternal. I think we ought to call ourselves Homo donans, that is the giving being, instead of Homo sapiens, or even worse, Homo economicus.
As a feminist mother, I've made it sort of my strong passion and life's work to make my daughter child feel like she has that power and agency in her life, because she's the one who's going to be running the world soon, and I feel like she's taking that on in a really embodied, serious, passionate way herself.
I never thought about breastfeeding twice until I became a breastfeeding mother. And I was radicalized by the ignorance of the healthcare providers that I trusted with the care of myself and my son at that time. I am passionate about making it easier for mothers to breastfeed without being heroines.
I think the most important thing is that you can't forget your voice. Academia, journalism, is so much about pretending to be objective, pretending to not be real. And I think the biggest thing that I learned from Literary Mama is it's okay to say what you think. It's okay to say what you feel, even about motherhood, which is so prescribed. I mean, motherhood, you're supposed to say certain things, do certain things, be a certain way. But Literary Mama has taught me, no, you don't have to be that way. There's so many different faces of motherhood. There's so many different ways to talk about motherhood. There's no one way, and there never can be.
Things, are changing because there is, what I'm seeing, and particularly today, really hearing for the first time, is that there are many organizations and individuals, and not just women of color organizations and individuals, but that are really now figuring out there are multiple issues. Like the one issue framework does not work anymore, but we have to connect all these issues because it makes the case stronger, right, for what we want. And so, hearing Taloma's presentation this morning, listening to what people are saying, people are really getting it. The mainstream is really getting it. They're starting to pick up the terminology.
We've all been blessed with unique gifts, and we try to encourage each youth to utilize their gifts to their full potential, because there's good in every single one of us, and we all have the ability to succeed in the city.
Now, looking around this room and at this conference this weekend and seeing so many women engaged in good and sound maternal scholarship, particularly in the context of this first ever conference on the International Motherhood Movement, I see we have indeed made that room, created a discipline of our own, and are ever ready to make it bigger and better. Indeed, plans are well underway for just that, a museum of our own. Thank you very much.
Well, I think a museum is very important because with any social movement, with any group of people, any culture, having a museum that documents where we've been really determines how we move forward. And so having something that shares the stories of mothers from every angle and from every socioeconomic class, from every part of the country, from every part of the world, to see how we all do basically the same job, but how we all complete it in a different way, and showing the magnitude of how our motherhood experience really is something that we just don't recognize as something that we're doing often.
Waiting patiently, hoping reverently, wanting all to see beyond this face, softly whispering, keenly listening, always envisioning a kinder human race. I am your sister, your mother, your daughter, your friend. I am she who is of you and will be to the end. I am your sister, your mother, your daughter, your friend. I am she. Calling urgently, reaching fervently, tapping memory of your first breath, bending time and space toward that one embrace, there but for the grace, crawling near death. Oh, all you brothers, you fathers, you sons, it is time to right the wrongs and stop the senseless cries. I am your sister, your mother, your daughter, your friend.
And I think that is what motherhood movement will do. Thank you.